"Dad, IT's-me, I'm alive," said the homeless boy to the millionaire. What happened next is shocking. Jonathan Hale was a man whose name appeared in business magazines, charity lists, and newspaper articles that celebrated successful entrepreneurs. People often described him as brilliant, disciplined, and inspiring. They admired how he built a large technology company from almost nothing. They admired his wealth, his leadership, and the way he supported young inventors. But the public only saw what was on the surface. They did not know the part of him that remained hidden behind his confident smile. They did not see the quiet sadness that lived inside him every single day. To most people, Jonathan seemed to have everything a person could want. He had a beautiful house with tall windows that reflected the morning sun. He had a team of employees who respected him deeply. He had more than enough money to travel, explore, and enjoy the world. Yet there was one thing he no longer had, one thing that mattered more to him than all the success he had earned. He no longer had his son. Years ago, when Jonathan's son Ethan was only 12, something happened that changed the entire course of his life. It was a day that began like any other, with sunshine, laughter, and lighthearted plans. But by evening, everything had shifted. There had been an accident at a lakeside campground where Ethan was spending a weekend with family friends. When the adults realized he was missing, they searched everywhere. The authorities searched too, but after many days they could not find Ethan. No clear explanation came. Only fear, confusion, and heartbreak remained behind. Although no one could prove what had happened, everyone assumed the worst. After several months, the authorities officially declared Ethan no longer living. That moment broke something inside Jonathan. The world moved on, but he could not. He tried to convince himself to accept what everyone said, yet deep inside him lived a small voice, a small hope, that whispered, "What if there was more to the story? What if your son is still out there?" But hope can be a painful thing. Sometimes it lifts a person up. Other times it shakes them with doubt. And over the years, Jonathan began to bury that hope because holding on to it hurt too much. His wife could not carry the grief either. Their marriage slowly fell apart, not because they no longer cared for each other, but because they did not know how to handle the sadness they shared. They became strangers walking through the same house. Eventually, they separated. Even though Jonathan understood why it happened, the end of his marriage added another heavy stone to the weight he already carried. To escape the memories that filled his home, he focused almost completely on work. He arrived at the office before sunrise and stayed long after everyone else had gone home. He answered every email, attended every meeting, and accepted every project. People believed he was simply a hardworking leader. But in reality, work had become a shelter, an escape from the parts of his life he did not want to face. He thought that if he kept his mind busy enough, the sadness would fade. It never truly did. 10 years passed this way, 10 quiet years of pretending everything was fine. 10 years of avoiding old photographs and birthday reminders. 10 years of feeling an emptiness that money could not fill. His employees sometimes noticed a faraway look in his eyes, as if he was staring at a distant memory only he could see. But no one asked about it. They assumed he was simply tired or thinking about business matters. Every morning, Jonathan parked his car in the underground garage beneath his office building. He walked through the same hallway, nodded to the same security guard, and entered the same elevator. His routine never changed. He found comfort in repetition. It kept his mind steady. But one winter morning, something small and unusual caught his attention. As he walked toward the building, he noticed a young boy sitting quietly on the sidewalk near the corner. The boy looked thin and tired, with a worn backpack beside him. His clothes were old but clean, as if he had tried to take care of them despite difficult circumstances. Jonathan only saw him for a moment before the elevator door closed, but something about the boy's posture stayed in his thoughts longer than expected. Over the next few days, he saw the same boy again, always in the same area, always sitting or standing nearby, never causing trouble. At first, Jonathan assumed the boy was simply another homeless youth struggling to survive. Sadly, he had seen similar scenes before. But the more he saw the boy, the more he noticed small details that he could not ignore. The boy never begged for money. He never carried signs or approached strangers. Instead, he watched people quietly as if studying them. And every time Jonathan passed by, he sensed the boy's eyes following him. Not in a threatening way, but in a way that felt strangely familiar, almost expectant. One afternoon, when the sun was beginning to set and the sky turned a pale orange, Jonathan stepped out of the building after a long day. He was lost in thought and did not immediately see the boy standing only a short distance away. When he finally noticed him, he paused in surprise. The boy seemed nervous, taking small steps forward, then stopping again. His hands shook slightly, and he kept looking down, gathering courage. Jonathan felt an unexpected concern rise inside him. He did not want the boy to feel afraid, but before he could speak, a security guard approached. The guard was polite but firm as he told the boy he could not remain near the building. The boy lowered his head and whispered an apology. Something in his voice caused Jonathan to turn around. It was soft, hopeful, almost familiar, but he still didn't understand. That night after he drove home, he found himself thinking about the boy again. Something about the way the boy looked at him had stirred a quiet feeling deep inside his heart, a feeling he thought had disappeared long ago. He told himself not to think too much about it, but the thought stayed. The next morning, the boy was gone. Jonathan felt an odd disappointment that surprised him. He took a slow breath and entered the building, trying to focus on work. He managed to push the thought aside for a few hours. Then at lunch, he stepped out to clear his mind, and there the boy was again, standing near the side entrance, almost as if he had been waiting. When their eyes met, the boy's breath shook. He took a hesitant step closer. Jonathan felt something shift inside him. He didn't know why, but his heart began to race. Perhaps it was the uncertainty in the boy's eyes, or perhaps it was the faint familiarity, an echo of a face he once knew, but he still did not understand. The boy seemed to struggle to speak, opening and closing his mouth several times before any sound came out. His hands trembled as he clutched the straps of his backpack. The silence between them felt heavy, filled with anticipation and fear. Finally, the boy drew in a long breath. His voice was soft, almost breaking as he spoke. "Dad, it's me, I'm alive." The words hit Jonathan like a sudden wind, leaving him still and breathless. For a moment he could not move, he could not even blink. His mind refused to process what he had just heard. It felt impossible, too unbelievable to accept, too shocking to ignore. The boy stared at him with wide, tear-filled eyes, not hopeful, not confident, just desperate. As if he had gathered every bit of courage he had for this one moment. Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest. His hands felt cold. Every memory of his son, his smile, his laugh, the brightness in his eyes, came rushing back all at once, overwhelming him. Yet at the same time, his logical mind insisted it had to be a mistake. People did not simply return after 10 years and claim to be someone long believed gone. It had to be confusion, or a misunderstanding, or something else entirely. But the boy's expression, that did not feel like a misunderstanding. There was something honest in it, something familiar in the way he tilted his head ever so slightly, just like Ethan used to do when he was nervous. The world around them seemed to fade away. The noise of the street, the footsteps of passing people, the distant sound of traffic, all of it became faint. The only thing Jonathan could hear clearly was his own heartbeat and the trembling voice of the boy who stood before him. In that moment, the carefully built walls around his heart began to crack. Hope, soft, fragile, and long forgotten, slowly awakened within him. But with hope came fear. Fear of believing too quickly, fear of being wrong, fear of having his heart broken all over again. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He stared at the boy, unsure whether to step closer or step away. The boy waited, silent and trembling, as if his entire world depended on what Jonathan would say next. And that was when everything began to change. The moment after the boy spoke those unexpected words, time seemed to stand still. Jonathan remained frozen, staring at the young face in front of him. His mind raced in many directions at once. He felt confusion, disbelief, and a small spark of hope that both comforted and frightened him at the same time. The boy looked just as tense, as if he feared what might happen next. His hands were shaking slightly, and he kept shifting his weight nervously from one foot to the other. People walked past them, not noticing the strange moment happening between the millionaire and the homeless boy. Cars moved along the street, horns sounded, and city noise continued as usual. But none of it reached Jonathan clearly. His focus remained locked on the trembling boy who had just called him Dad. After a few long seconds, Jonathan finally found his voice. It came out soft, unsure, almost hesitant. "What did you say?" The boy swallowed hard. His voice trembled as he repeated the words a little quieter this time. "It's me, I'm your son." Hearing it again did not make it any easier for Jonathan. His heart felt heavy, filled with questions he could not find answers to. The boy looked older than the memory Jonathan carried of Ethan, yet something about his eyes looked strangely familiar. There was a gentleness and a depth that reminded him of the boy he lost 10 years ago, but his mind kept telling him it was impossible. "You must be mistaken," Jonathan finally said. His voice was calm but unsure. "My son, he passed away a long time ago." The boy's eyes filled with tears that he tried to blink away quickly. He shook his head, taking a small step forward. "No, I didn't. I'm right here." His voice broke, filled not with anger but with a quiet ache, as if carrying a truth too heavy for someone his age. He seemed desperate for Jonathan to believe him, yet terrified of saying too much too fast. Jonathan felt his heart pull in two different directions. One part wanted to embrace the possibility, to believe that a miracle had occurred. The other part urged caution, reminding him that hope, when shattered, could leave deeper scars. "How do you know me?" he asked softly. "Why would you think I'm your father?" The boy looked down at his worn shoes, gathering courage. When he finally lifted his head, his expression held a mixture of sadness and determination. "I know because I've remembered things, not everything, not clearly, but some things." His voice shook again. "I remembered your face. I remembered my name was Ethan. And I remembered something you used to say to me every night before I slept." Jonathan's breath caught. He had a special phrase he used to tell Ethan, a gentle promise spoken only between father and son. A phrase he never shared with anyone else. "What was it?" he asked quietly, feeling a sudden nervousness rise inside him. The boy hesitated. His eyes softened in a way that made him look younger, almost like the child Jonathan once held. And then, with great care, he whispered the familiar words. "You used to say, no matter how dark the night gets, the sun will always find you in the morning." Jonathan felt the ground beneath him shift. His chest tightened and a warmth spread across his skin. That phrase was not common. It was personal, something he had created when Ethan was very small to comfort him on nights he had trouble sleeping. For a moment he could not speak. He simply stared at the boy, trying to understand what this meant. Was it a coincidence? A trick? Or something more real than anything he had imagined? Before he could ask anything else, the security guard who had spoken earlier returned, looking concerned. "Sir, is everything okay?" the guard asked, glancing at the boy. Jonathan nodded quickly. "Yes, everything's fine." "Give us a moment." The guard stepped back, watching from a distance but respectful of the situation. Jonathan turned his attention back to the boy. There were too many questions to count, but one rose above the rest. If you truly believe you're my son," he said carefully, "where have you been all these years? Why didn't you come sooner?" The boy's shoulders tensed at the question. He looked away, his eyes drifting to the ground as if he feared the truth might push Jonathan away. "I didn't remember," the boy whispered. "Not until recently. For a long time I didn't even know my name. I only knew little pieces like shadows of memories." He paused, trying to steady himself. "I lived with different people. I stayed in different places. I didn't have anything to guide me back." His voice remained gentle, never defensive or demanding. He wasn't trying to convince Jonathan with force. He was simply telling the truth as he knew it. Jonathan felt a quiet ache in his chest. The idea of a child wandering through life alone, without guidance or family, without even his own identity, was painful to imagine. But still, he needed clarity. "Why now?" he asked. "What made you come to me?" The boy reached into his backpack and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It looked like it had been folded many times. He handed it carefully to Jonathan, who opened it slowly. Inside was a printed image, a small photo from a newspaper article featuring Jonathan at a charity event. The boy pointed at the image. "I saw this," he said softly, "and something inside me, it felt warm, familiar. I didn't know why at first, but I kept staring at your face. And the more I looked, the more my memories began to return, just bits and pieces, but enough to bring me here." Jonathan stared at the photo and then at the boy. His mind still struggled to accept what was happening, yet his heart began to soften in ways he didn't expect. The boy continued, voice trembling again. "I didn't know if you would believe me. I didn't know if you would be angry, but I had to try. I had to come to you, because something in me said you're the only person who would understand." There was a sincerity in his words that Jonathan could not ignore. This wasn't a boy looking for money or attention. This was someone searching for belonging, for answers, for a connection he believed was his by birth. Still, the logical part of Jonathan's mind whispered caution. Emotions could not replace certainty. Hope could not replace truth. "We need to be sure," he finally said with a calm firmness. "Truly sure. Because this, what you're saying, it is something that cannot be taken lightly." The boy nodded quickly. "I understand. I don't want to cause you harm. I only want to know who I am." The honesty in those words struck Jonathan deeply. The boy wasn't demanding anything, neither money nor shelter nor recognition. He simply wanted the truth. "Come with me," Jonathan said gently. "We can talk somewhere more comfortable." The boy's eyes widened with a mix of relief and nervousness. He nodded slowly, clutching his backpack tightly as if it were the only thing he owned in the world. Jonathan led him to his car. The boy hesitated before getting in, as if unsure if he belonged in such a place. When he finally slipped into the passenger seat, he sat carefully, his hands folded in his lap. He looked around the interior of the car but did not touch anything. The ride was quiet at first. The boy looked out the window, watching the city pass by. Jonathan kept glancing at him every few seconds, studying his profile, the shape of his nose, the lines around his eyes, the way he held himself. There were small similarities, tiny hints that reminded him of the child he once knew. But he didn't allow himself to jump to conclusions. After a while, the boy spoke softly. "Thank you for not turning me away." Jonathan gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "This is something that needs to be understood fully," he replied gently. "If there is even a small chance that you are who you say you are, I could never walk away from that." The boy nodded, a faint hope shining in his eyes. When they arrived at a quiet place where they could talk without interruption, Jonathan parked the car. The two sat there for a moment, neither knowing what to say first. Finally, Jonathan took a steady breath. "We will need to run a test," he said gently. "A DNA test. It is the only way to get the truth." The boy nodded immediately. "Yes, I want that too. I want to know for sure." His calm acceptance surprised Jonathan. Someone trying to trick him would resist, yet this boy welcomed the idea. The moment felt heavy yet hopeful, quiet yet filled with powerful emotion. Both of them sat there, two lives unexpectedly crossing after years of loss. For the first time in a decade, Jonathan allowed himself to imagine something he had long pushed away. The possibility that the greatest miracle he could ever hope for might be sitting right beside him. The hours after their conversation felt strangely quiet for both of them. Jonathan drove the boy, who claimed to be Ethan, to a small but comfortable guest space inside his house. It was a warm room with soft lighting and a calm atmosphere. The boy's eyes widened when he stepped inside. He had never seen such a peaceful place in a long time. Still, he placed his backpack neatly by the corner, careful not to disturb anything. His movements were gentle, almost shy. "You can rest here for now," Jonathan said softly, standing by the doorway. The boy nodded with polite gratitude. "Thank you. I appreciate it more than you know." Jonathan watched him for a moment, noticing the way he tried to hide his nervousness by folding his hands tightly. He wanted to ask more questions, wanted to understand everything at once, but he reminded himself to be patient. The boy needed calmness, not pressure. "I'll bring you some fresh clothes," he said, sensing the boy's hesitation. "You can shower if you want. You must be tired." The boy nodded again, this time with deeper emotion. "I can't remember the last time I felt safe enough to rest," he admitted quietly. Jonathan's heart tightened. There were so many things he still didn't know, where the boy had lived, who had cared for him, how he had survived all these years. But those questions could wait. For now, the boy needed comfort. After giving him some time alone, Jonathan stepped out into the hallway and closed the door gently. He walked toward his living room and sank into the couch, running his hands over his face. His thoughts were tangled, moving in every direction like loose pages in a strong breeze. Who was this boy? Was he truly his son? Could it possibly be real? He leaned back, letting out a long breath. A part of him wanted to believe so badly. The other part feared believing too quickly. For 10 years, he had lived with loss. For 10 years, he had imagined what Ethan might look like if he were still alive. And now, a boy stood in front of him with familiar eyes and a familiar way of speaking. But hope was fragile. It needed truth to survive. The next morning, Jonathan arranged for the DNA test. They visited a quiet medical facility, away from reporters and attention. The boy sat calmly, though a slight tremor in his hands betrayed his anxiety. He watched the nurse prepare the simple test, and when it was done, he let out a slow breath, as if releasing a weight he had carried for years. "How long will it take?" the boy asked softly once they stepped outside. "A few days," Jonathan replied, "maybe less." The boy nodded, accepting the waiting with quiet patience. He didn't seem afraid of the results, only curious, as if ready to finally learn who he truly was. When they returned to the house, the sun was beginning to set. The sky glowed with soft pink and gold shades, casting gentle colors across the living room wall. The boy stood by the window, watching the sky change color, his expression thoughtful. "It's beautiful," he murmured. Jonathan approached slowly. "Do you like sunsets?" The boy nodded without looking away. "They remind me of something, I don't know what exactly, but something calm, something warm." Jonathan felt a tiny spark inside him. Ethan had loved sunsets too. They used to sit on the porch when he was little, watching the sky together. He pushed the memory aside before his emotions grew too strong. That evening, the boy opened up a little more. They sat at the dining table with simple, warm food between them. The boy ate slowly, savoring each bite as if he had not tasted a home-cooked meal in years. "You said you remembered things," Jonathan began gently. "Can you tell me what kind of things?" The boy placed his spoon down and thought carefully. "They come like small flashes," he said, "not full memories, more like tiny pictures or feelings." He paused. "Sometimes I remember a room with a big window. Sometimes I remember a voice reading bedtime stories. Sometimes I remember laughter." His voice softened. "And sometimes I remember missing someone even before I knew who." The quiet truth of his words touched Jonathan deeply. The boy wasn't speaking like someone performing a trick. His memories came with a softness that felt real, almost delicate. It was as if each memory was a fragile piece of glass he was trying not to drop. "What about your name?" Jonathan asked. "You said you remembered your name was Ethan," the boy nodded. "It came suddenly. I was sitting alone one day and a headache came, and then a word repeated in my mind. Ethan. It felt like it belonged to me. And when I heard people say that name nearby, something inside me reacted. It wasn't like learning something new. It was like remembering something old." A soft silence filled the room as Jonathan absorbed his words. He felt the old wound inside him, one created by 10 years of grief, tingle with hope and fear. The boy continued, voice steady. "When I saw your picture in the newspaper, my heart beat fast. I didn't understand why at first. But it felt like recognition, like a puzzle piece fitting somewhere." He looked down. "I knew I had to find you." Jonathan's throat tightened. He could see the boy wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't demanding a place in his life. He was simply reaching out, hoping for truth, hoping for connection. "Do you remember anything else?" Jonathan asked gently. "Anything that might help us understand your past few years?" The boy hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I remember someone who helped me when I was younger. A man, he wasn't family and he didn't stay long, but he gave me food and a blanket." His eyebrows drew together. "I don't know his name anymore. I don't know why he left me. All I know is that after he disappeared, I wandered from place to place." He lifted his eyes, which looked older than his age. "Living without knowing who you are, it feels like being in a dream you can't wake up from." Jonathan felt a deep ache in his chest. He wanted to reach across the table and offer comfort, but he held back, not wanting to overwhelm the boy. "It must have been very hard," he said softly. The boy nodded. "Sometimes I wanted to give up looking for answers. But something told me not to." His voice turned even quieter. "Something told me that somewhere someone cared about me." Jonathan looked away quickly, his breath unsteady. He didn't want the boy to see the emotion rising in his eyes. In the days that followed, the boy slowly became more comfortable in the house. He remained polite, quiet, and careful, always asking permission before touching anything. He helped fold blankets, arranged dishes neatly after meals, and even tried sweeping the floor once until Jonathan gently told him he didn't need to. "You're a guest," Jonathan said with a kind smile. "You don't need to do chores." The boy smiled softly. "I want to help. It makes me feel like I belong somewhere." Those words touched something deep inside Jonathan. He didn't respond immediately, afraid his voice might betray how deeply moved he was. One night, the boy couldn't sleep. He walked quietly into the living room and sat on the couch, wrapping a blanket around himself. Jonathan found him there and sat beside him, leaving a respectful distance. "Are you all right?" he asked. The boy nodded but didn't speak for a moment. Then, in a whisper, he said, Do you ever think memories can hide because they're waiting for the right moment to return? Jonathan considered the question. Maybe they hide because they're too painful, he replied gently. Or maybe because they're too important. The boy looked at him, eyes shining softly. I feel like I'm getting closer to something important. Jonathan's voice dropped to a quiet whisper. I feel that too. The room felt warm and calm, with only the soft ticking of a clock filling the silence. In that moment, they weren't millionaire and homeless boy. They weren't strangers trying to understand a mystery. They were simply two souls sitting together in shared uncertainty, sharing a quiet hope neither fully knew how to express. And then, midway through the gentle silence, the boy said something unexpected. There's one more thing I remembered. Jonathan turned to him carefully. What is it? The boy swallowed, his voice trembling slightly as he spoke. A small wooden boat. You taught me how to make one with paper first, then with real wood. He looked up. And you told me that even small things can carry big dreams. Jonathan felt his heartbeat stop for a moment. That was another memory only Ethan could know. He had taught his son how to carve little wooden boats in their backyard. Ethan used to float them in a small pond while laughing with delight. A quiet shock washed over him. His breath grew uneven. The possibility that the boy was indeed Ethan grew stronger, clearer, almost undeniable. But the final truth still depended on the test results. The next morning brought a message from the medical facility. The results were ready. Jonathan held the sealed envelope in his hands, feeling its weight as if it carried the future. The boy stood before him, eyes wide, hands clenched, waiting with both fear and hope. Inside that envelope was an answer that could change everything, an answer neither of them could prepare for. Jonathan opened it slowly, breath shaking, heart pounding, knowing that the moment he read the words, their lives would never be the same again. Jonathan stood in the center of his living room holding the sealed envelope, unable to open it right away. His hands were steady on the outside, but inside he felt a storm of emotions swirling. The boy stood a few feet away, watching him with quiet fear, quiet hope, and quiet longing. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe too loudly, as if he believed even the smallest action might change the outcome. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The only sound in the room was the soft ticking of a wall clock, each second reminding them that the truth was just inches away. The boy's eyes were fixed on the envelope. He had waited days for this moment, yet now that it was here, it felt almost too heavy to face. Finally, Jonathan took a deep breath. Are you ready? He asked. The boy nodded slowly. Yes, he whispered, though his voice cracked softly. His fingers curled tightly around the fabric of his worn shirt. Jonathan carefully tore open the envelope. The sound of the paper ripping felt louder than it should have. He pulled out the folded document inside and opened it with shaky fingers. His eyes scanned the lines, slowly at first, then again, faster this time, as if needing confirmation. The boy waited, his heart pounding so loudly he felt sure the entire room could hear it. He watched Jonathan's expression carefully, searching for any sign, any hint of what the document said. After a long moment, Jonathan let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. His eyes softened, and something inside him seemed to lift, like a heavy door finally opening after years of being locked shut. He looked at the boy, really looked at him. It's true, he said gently, his voice thick with emotion. You are Ethan, you're my son. The boy froze, his breath stopped. His eyes widened, filled instantly with tears he couldn't hold back. For a second he couldn't move or speak. He simply stared at Jonathan as if he were hearing the word home for the very first time. I am, he whispered, barely audible. Jonathan nodded, stepping closer. Yes, you're really my son. The boy's legs weakened, and he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. Tears spilled down his cheeks, silent tears, trembling tears. They weren't loud or dramatic. They were soft and full of all the emotions he had carried alone for years without understanding them. Jonathan felt his eyes grow wet too. He had imagined so many times what it might feel like if he ever received news that Ethan was alive, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. It felt unreal, like a dream too good to trust. Yet the truth was right there in black and white on the document in his hand. Very slowly, he reached out and placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. The boy looked up at him with trembling lips, searching for certainty. You found your way back to me, Jonathan said softly. Ethan let out a shaky breath, the kind that comes when a long journey finally ends. Without thinking, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Jonathan in a hesitant, uncertain hug, almost as if he feared he might be rejected. But Jonathan wrapped his arms around him too, carefully and warmly, as if embracing something precious he had thought lost forever. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply stood there in the quiet room, father and son reunited after 10 long years of separation. Years filled with unanswered questions, pain, and empty spaces where love had once lived. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan wiped his eyes and gave a small, shy smile. "I didn't think this could ever happen," he said softly. "Neither did I," Jonathan replied, brushing away a tear of his own. "But you're here now, that's what matters." As the truth settled into their hearts, a new warmth spread through the room, a warmth that felt like healing, like hope, like the beginning of something long overdue. But with joy came questions, many questions. "How did you survive all these years?" Jonathan asked gently once they both sat down on the couch. "Where did you go? What happened to you?" Ethan took a deep breath. He didn't rush. He took his time gathering the pieces of his memories, selecting each one carefully as if afraid some might fall apart if handled too quickly. "I don't remember everything clearly," he began softly. "Some memories are blurry, and some feel like they belong to someone else. But I remember waking up once far from home." He paused, holding his hands together in his lap. "I didn't know my name, I didn't know where I came from, I didn't know who to trust. A man found me, someone kind but unsure what to do. He gave me food and a blanket. He helped me until he couldn't anymore, but he didn't understand who I was either." Jonathan listened with full attention, feeling both sorrow and admiration for the strength Ethan had shown. "I stayed with him for a while," Ethan continued, "but he had to move on. I think he felt bad leaving me, but he didn't have a home himself." Ethan's voice grew softer. "After that, I lived in different places, shelters sometimes, streets sometimes. I learned how to survive, but I never felt settled, never felt complete." He paused, taking another breath. "Then one day I saw your picture and something inside me woke up, something familiar." Jonathan nodded slowly. "A spark of memory." "Yes," Ethan whispered, "a spark that kept growing." They talked for hours after that, not rushing through anything. Ethan shared fragments of his past, the kindness of strangers who offered food, the quiet nights spent under open skies, the confusion of having flashes of memories he didn't understand. And Jonathan shared memories of Ethan's childhood, their small traditions, their morning routines, the silly jokes they used to share. For both of them, the conversation felt like stitching together pieces of a large, broken fabric, slowly making something whole again. Over the next few days, life inside the house changed gently but noticeably. Ethan began to feel more comfortable walking through the rooms. He warmed up to the idea of belonging somewhere. He asked questions about his old life, his childhood room, his favorite toys, many of which Jonathan had carefully stored away because he couldn't bring himself to let them go. One afternoon, Jonathan showed Ethan a small wooden box filled with items from the past. Inside were a tiny wooden boat, a few crayon drawings, and a bracelet made from colorful beads, one Ethan had created when he was very young. Ethan touched each item with great care, as if holding pieces of a lost treasure. "I remember this," he whispered when he picked up the wooden boat. "I remember making this with you." Jonathan smiled warmly. "Yes, you used to make one almost every week." Ethan's eyes glowed with soft light. "I can't believe I'm holding it again." Seeing his son reconnect with forgotten memories filled Jonathan's heart with emotion. Every little moment felt like a miracle, the kind of miracle that slowly eased the ache inside him. But while their connection grew stronger each day, one question still hovered quietly in the background. What truly happened the day Ethan disappeared? Whenever the subject came close, Ethan's expression shifted. His eyes grew distant, as if trying to reach a memory locked far away. He would frown slightly, as though the moment hovered just out of reach. "I see pieces," he would whisper, "but not the whole picture." Jonathan did not push him. He understood that some truths required time, gentle time, patient time. One night, as Ethan lay on the couch under a soft blanket, looking up at the ceiling with thoughtful eyes, he asked something that caught Jonathan by surprise. "Why did you keep believing?" he asked softly. "Even when everyone else said I was gone." Jonathan sat beside him, choosing his words carefully. "Because love doesn't vanish," he said. "It doesn't follow rules, it doesn't disappear just because someone says it should." Even when I tried to convince myself to let go, a small part of me kept hoping. Ethan turned his head, meeting his father's eyes with a gentle expression. "I think that hope helped me," he murmured, "even when I didn't know who I was." Jonathan felt emotion rise in his chest. He placed a gentle hand on Ethan's arm. "Maybe hope travels farther than we think." The moment was quiet, touching, and full of meaning. As days passed, their bond grew deeper. They cooked meals together, watched simple shows on television, and shared stories. Ethan learned how Jonathan lived, how he worked, and how he had struggled through the years of loss. And Jonathan learned how Ethan had survived, how he kept walking forward even without knowing where he belonged. But then, one afternoon, while looking through an old box of documents stored in a study drawer, Ethan found something unexpected, something that made him stop and stare. It was a report from the early investigation, an old file with handwritten notes and records from the day he disappeared. Ethan traced the lines with his fingers, feeling a strange pull inside him. I remember something," he whispered, his voice faint. Jonathan looked at him with concern. "What is it?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "Not everything, just a feeling, a small moment. Something wasn't right that day." He didn't say more, not yet. But the uncertainty in his eyes revealed that another chapter of his story was waiting to unfold, one hidden deep within the past. As father and son stood together, looking at the old file, the quiet truth became clear. Their reunion was only the beginning. More answers were waiting, more memories were stirring, and the journey toward the whole truth had just begun. Ethan sat on the sofa with the old investigation file resting on his lap. His fingers moved gently over the worn pages as though they were delicate pieces of his past. Every time he turned a page, a soft crease formed between his eyebrows. He was trying to understand something hidden deep in his memory, something that had been locked away for years. Jonathan sat beside him, giving him space yet offering silent support. "It feels strange," Ethan whispered. "Like my mind is showing me tiny pieces but hiding the important part." Jonathan nodded. "Memories can be like that. They return slowly when you're ready." The file had been untouched for years. After the officials declared Ethan gone, Jonathan couldn't bring himself to open it again. Seeing it now stirred old emotions inside him, pain, longing, and confusion. But beside him sat his living son, breathing, thinking, remembering. That made everything feel different. Ethan studied one page for a long time. It contained notes from the day he disappeared. "This part," he said softly, tapping his finger on a scribbled line. "I feel like I know something about it, but the memory is too distant." "What do you feel?" Jonathan asked gently. Ethan closed his eyes. He breathed slowly as if trying to reach a memory floating somewhere inside him. For a moment his face softened. Then he shook his head lightly. "I remember being scared," he said quietly. "Not because something bad happened, but because I didn't understand where I was." Jonathan waited, his heart watching every expression on Ethan's face. "Do you remember anyone with you?" he asked softly. Ethan hesitated. "A voice, not a familiar one. Someone spoke to me kindly. I don't remember the words." Just the feeling of someone trying to help. Jonathan felt a bit of relief. "Maybe that was the man who found you later." "Maybe," Ethan whispered, though the uncertainty in his voice said he wasn't fully convinced. They talked for a little while longer, but the memories did not return clearly enough to form a full picture. Still, Ethan seemed calmer after sharing what little he remembered. Sometimes, speaking small pieces of the truth helped open doors to deeper understanding later. As the days passed, father and son began living their new life together. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy. Ethan was still adjusting to the idea of belonging somewhere after so many years of wandering from place to place. Some mornings he woke up early, sitting quietly by the window, watching the sky change colors as if trying to remind himself he was not alone anymore. Jonathan would join him and sit down without saying anything. They would look at the sunrise together, letting the quiet moment speak for them. The simple act brought a calm warmth to both their hearts. One morning, Ethan surprised Jonathan by asking if they could visit his childhood room. The room had been untouched for years. The thought of opening it again made Jonathan nervous, but he nodded gently and led Ethan upstairs. The door opened slowly, revealing a room frozen in time. Toys rested neatly on shelves, books lined up in a small bookshelf, and a blanket with bright colors lay folded on the bed. Dust had gathered in some corners, but everything else remained exactly as it had been the day Ethan disappeared. Ethan stepped inside carefully, almost cautiously, as if entering a memory rather than a room. He ran his fingers lightly over the blanket, touching a corner of his old life. "I don't remember everything," he said quietly, "but something about this room feels warm." Jonathan watched him with a tender expression. "You used to love this room. You would stay up at night reading stories and telling me all the things you wanted to do when you grew up." Ethan smiled softly, touching a small toy boat on the shelf. "And this," he whispered, "brings back something too. I think this is the boat we made together." Jonathan nodded. "Yes, you insisted we paint it blue even though we had only a tiny bit of paint left." Ethan laughed, a small, gentle laugh that filled the room with light. "I must have loved that color." "You did," Jonathan said with a smile. "You said it looked like the sky when you felt happy." The moment felt precious, like stitching together tiny pieces of a broken past. Each memory that returned was like a soft light in the darkness, reminding them both that healing was possible. As days turned into weeks, Ethan slowly grew more confident in the house. He helped Jonathan in the kitchen, learned how to use appliances he had never seen before, and even tried to help reorganize the study. He also began attending therapy sessions with a gentle counselor who specialized in helping people recover lost memories and build emotional stability. Jonathan joined him in some sessions, and together they learned how to communicate better, how to understand each other's fears, and how to move forward without rushing. One afternoon, after a counseling session, they sat in the car for a long time before going home. Ethan looked out the window, his reflection soft in the glass. "I feel like I'm living a life I lost," he murmured, "like I'm trying to catch up with myself." Jonathan placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone anymore. You don't have to catch up all at once." Ethan nodded slowly. "I know, but sometimes I think about what I missed, school, friends, growing up in a home, all those years." His voice drifted off, carrying quiet sadness. Jonathan's heart tightened gently. "We will make new memories," he said softly. "Better ones. Ones that belong to your future, not your past." Those words seemed to settle into Ethan's heart like a warm blanket. The house that once felt too big and too quiet now felt alive again. It filled with small sounds, Ethan humming softly while washing dishes, footsteps in the hallway, light laughter during breakfast, pieces of life that Jonathan had not heard in so long. But despite the growing comfort, something kept pulling at Ethan. Something about the investigation file continued to whisper at the back of his thoughts. Sometimes he dreamed of the day he disappeared, dreams filled with unclear images and feelings he couldn't explain. One morning, Ethan entered the living room with the file in his hands again. "I want to understand," he said, "even if the memory feels far away." Jonathan sat beside him. "We can read it together." They went through each page slowly. As they read, Ethan felt a strange mix of emotions, curiosity, confusion, and a deep desire for clarity. "Do you think someone was looking after me that day?" he asked. Jonathan considered the question. "Maybe, or maybe someone found you by chance and tried to help. But why didn't anyone bring me back?" Ethan wondered aloud. "Why didn't the memories return sooner?" "That is something only time can tell," Jonathan replied gently. "Sometimes the mind protects itself. Sometimes memories come back only when we're safe enough to handle them." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. Later that week, something unexpected happened. While cleaning an old drawer, Ethan discovered a small box filled with little items from his early childhood: stickers, marbles, a few colorful pins, and a folded piece of paper. The paper looked old but carefully stored. When Ethan opened it, his eyes widened. It was a drawing he had made of himself, Jonathan, and their old backyard pond. At the bottom, in uneven, childish handwriting, were the words, "The sun will always find you." Ethan held the drawing close, touched deeply. "I remember writing this," he whispered. "I remember you saying those words." Jonathan smiled warmly. "You used to repeat it whenever you felt brave." Ethan's eyes softened. "Maybe that's why I kept walking all those years. Maybe that promise stayed inside me even when I forgot everything else." Jonathan felt tears form in his eyes. Maybe the love between us stayed even when memories disappeared. More days passed, and their bond grew stronger. They cooked together, took walks in the evening, played gentle games at home, and talked for hours about dreams for the future. Slowly, Ethan began imagining a life ahead, a life where he could study, grow, make friends, and discover the world with confidence. He even said one day with a shy smile, "I want to learn something new every week, maybe music, maybe painting, maybe something else." Jonathan laughed warmly. "We can try everything. Your future is wide open." But the greatest change happened quietly inside their hearts. Jonathan slowly released years of pain as he embraced the miracle of having his son back. And Ethan allowed himself to feel safe, welcomed, and loved, something he hadn't felt for years. One evening, while watching the sunset from the backyard porch, Ethan said something quietly profound. "You know," he murmured, "I used to think I was searching for a place, but I realize now I was searching for a person. Someone who would make me feel like I belonged somewhere." Jonathan turned to him with soft eyes. "And did you find that person?" Ethan nodded gently, a warm smile forming on his lips. "Yes, I found you." The sky glowed with soft orange and gold light, surrounding them in peaceful warmth. A moment of deep understanding passed between them, one built on love, healing, and the quiet strength of two hearts finding each other again after a long journey apart. The mystery of Ethan's missing years still remained, but the fear and emptiness were gone, replaced by hope, trust, and the promise of a future they would build together. "You know," Jonathan said quietly, resting a hand on Ethan's shoulder, "the sun truly did find you in the morning, just like I always promised." Ethan smiled, leaning gently against him. "And now, I finally feel like the morning is mine again." Their story, once filled with loss and uncertainty, now opened into a beautiful new beginning. A beginning full of discovery, growth, and love. A beginning that proved that even after the longest night, light always found its way back. And together, father and son walked forward, toward a future bright with hope, ready to uncover the rest of their story, one peaceful step at a time.